Live from the South.
I love City Image.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of City Image.
Wow.
We're here, y'all. Like we told you, we were going to be consistent. Consistency
is the key.
We are here.
It's major.
And man, do we have an episode in store for you guys.
Wow.
If you guys enjoyed last episode's White Evangelicalism, man, today is the conclusion of that. And man, we have a special guest in the building, but I'm going to save that for later. You already know it's your boy, Rich, the husband, a.k.a. the artist formerly known as Young Flatbush, in the building.
In the building.
To my right, sexy as always,
Always.
debonair,
Always making me fall.
Danny, the creator.
How's it doing, guys? Pleasure to be here. So good.
Dope.
And across from me, my man, my brother,
My
Bryant,
goodness.
the theological giant. Not any giant.
No.
The theological one.
That's good. Much love, man. Great to be back. Feel
up.
good, man.
How you feeling?
Good, man.
You look good.
Thank you, man.
Not Danny good, but good.
Oh, man. Well, that's all right. I mean, I know Danny, that's like a perfect standard.
Oh,
but we all
my
fall
gosh,
short of the glory.
Of Danny.
I'm just as
Danny.
Danny.
You know. But yo, the fade's been getting good, you know.
Yo,
Yeah, good
I'm
reviews.
feeling
The
it.
shape up with the fades. That's been getting
Yo.
good. That's been getting good reviews.
Word.
I'm a little jealous.
Okay.
I can just go half bagel or no hair. That's it. That's all I got. Those
I
are my
mean,
moves.
I would go fade, but I spent too much time.
Oh no!
Don't touch perfection.
No!
Don't touch perfection.
Yo, don't you dare!
You'll lose all your power.
I know.
I know,
You're
right?
too illustrious. to do
Puerto
that.
Rican Samson. Don't do that.
Facts.
Word.
Much.
And man, we've got a dear friend, a
Wow.
dear brother.
Wow.
All of our lead pastors. Man, we have the privilege of knowing him, growing with him, being discipled by him. We have none other than the Shogun of Flatbush, James Roberson.
Hey.
Talk to the people, my brother.
Fire.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
Fire in the booth.
It's good to be here. Excited to be here.
It's done though.
Man, boom. I'm honored to be here.
That's what's up, man.
Good stuff, bro.
Well, cool, man. I really want to start this time off, man. We have just a crazy thing happening in our world right now. Just so many men just being called out for
Exposed.
Exposed just for all kinds of deviant behavior, sexual advances towards, minors and women and boys, and just it seems like every day is just like, yo, who is going to be in the headline today? Just behavior that they're ashamed of, tried to cover up, still trying to cover up. Just wanted to get y'all's take on it, man. How have you guys been processing it? What do you think this means for our country? Just for all this to be happening. I saw a segment even on the Breakfast Club, Charlemagne talking about rape culture.
Killed that.
Yeah, man. I really appreciated him exposing hip hop, which is something that I feel like we don't hold accountable to. What it does in that vein, how it degrades the women in our society and things like that. So want to get y'all's take on it, man. Just kind of off the dome, man. What are your thoughts on what's been happening?
Yeah, I think it's been crazy. It has been a sense of like you wake up every day and you wonder who is going to be next.
Who's next?
Whose perception am I going to be totally changed and transformed? Like who am I going to see differently today?
Yeah.
But one thing, I think it's good. I actually think it's really good because I think we're finally putting that to the same standard, right? The same value.
Yeah.
On something like rape or like assault. We're kind of finally putting it where it should be held, right? And actually, I realized this, how much, like, in a sense, rape culture is so prevalent. I remember I went to a bowling alley, right? And I was with a bunch of people, and this was probably about like 7 months ago, right? And they had like a oldies night kind of like, and for us, oldies is like the 90s, right? And so they played music videos from the 90s and the crazy, stuff that we used to digest normally growing up. It made me like so much aware about how this has affected us as a culture, how it has affected me personally. Like, how it has affected my view of women, how much I've seen women sexualized at growing up. And yeah, it's definitely affected our culture, and I think we wonder why we have so much issues with that nowadays. And you don't have far to look, you know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. I think for me, everyone, you know, a lot of guys are getting exposed, but the one that kind of shocked me the most was Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because I'm a huge Kevin Spacey fan. House of Cards is probably my favorite show.
Wow.
And like when he got exposed, I was like, oh man, I'm like, dang. Now I start feeling convicted. Like, now I can't ever watch House of Cards no more. I can't, you know, ever do any of that. But it, you know, again, it kind of reiterated that talent never, ever betrays like your character. You know, you can be super talented, but wicked at the same time.
Yeah.
And what I did find was interesting, though, especially with a lot of these guys, you would hear people saying, yeah, you know, we've always known for years that Kevin Spacey was doing this kind of stuff. Yeah. And what I found was interesting was like, well, if you kind of knew for years that Kevin Spacey was doing that stuff, and it was not just him, but a couple of other people too who were being exposed, like, yeah, you know, so for just, I can speak on Kevin Spacey, but like, you know, one commentator was like, yeah, you know, he would just, you know, have these sexual advances towards men on set, and we've known this for years. And I was like, okay, well, why didn't anybody speak up about that? Why, you know? And it was because Kevin Spacey had this power. He had this sort of like, no one's gonna believe you, the accuser. Kevin Spacey is who he is, and nobody wants to try to go against him, try to expose him. But you know, and so a lot of these guys were just kept safe because of their power. And so it does remind you of the power dynamic, man, that oftentimes people with money and fame have, and the people who are abused, and they tend to abuse people who won't, you know, speak out because they don't have that equal status in society, right? So, you know, again, it just speaks to the fact that a lot of people are in pain and hiding and not wanting to confront this because they feel as if they won't be believed. So those are just kind of some of the thoughts that were running through my mind.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting when you look back at from Bill Cosby to Bill O'Reilly to even Bill Clinton, right? So you have all these people who they were called out, but there was a whole host of people that were called out in the 90s that it wasn't effective. You know, and even Bill Cosby wasn't effective. So there was a lot to put on the line for a woman who had no power to look at a man who had power. And in a lot of ways, power and sexual prowess kind of went hand in hand, you know? So if you were somebody who was making a lot of money, or you had a great TV show or whatever, I think that people just assumed that you could do whatever you want. And you know, not just the Kevin Spaceys of the world, but Louis C.K., like you guys are talking about. And I mean, and the crazy part is that Louis C.K. had, as part of his shtick of going in front of people and masturbating, that was his shtick. Wow. So then that actually comes out. So this man was so bold to not only masturbate in front of women, but he put it as a part of his comedy.
Bill Cosby, I think, had a stick on putting pills into drinks.
Wow.
And he put it a part of his comedy too. Yeah. That's insane.
So when you don't think you can get caught, I think it gives you a lot of leverage. I mean, obviously as Christians, I think we try to have compassion even for anyone, but there is a part of me that, you know, when people aren't called out for a very long time, and when you're in a culture of sinful acceptance, you begin to believe this is what you're owed. So like you talked about, who's the Playboy? Hugh Hefner. You know, you guys earlier made a joke. You can maybe say it again, but do we really think those young women liked him? Or, I mean, do we?
Right.
And isn't this when we went to Cancun, there were all these older guys with younger women, and we just accepted it, right? We don't question it because we presume, yes, you in your geriatric stage, you are valuable enough for this girl who's 25 and looks incredible. That makes sense, and we all know it's a lie, right? So there's a part of us that we're kind of blind to some of these things as well, and I think we're gonna have to peel back this issue in the culture for quite some time. Until we all wake up. Yeah,
I'll say two quick things. One, my prayer is that even for us as leaders, even in the church, that we would not fall to temptation, not necessarily in a sexual way, but just, that abuse of power is something that's always a temptation. And when you have somebody hanging onto your words, when you have people who just respect you and who do what you tell them to do, there's always that temptation to abuse that power, man. And just consistently praying that God would never just allow us to just fall into a place where we're using that for personal gain, things like that. And number two, kind of piggybacking on that, is just like, man, praying for the church, because I haven't heard any pastors kind of come out in this piece, but part of me is just like, man, it's a matter of time. Because if it's in the world, it's in the church. And I'm just praying for congregations that as the fallout, from this happens, I know that a lot of people are just going to be speaking up a lot more about these topics, and just praying that our witness would just not be tarnished by people who are abusing their powers.
Well, let me just not to correct in any way, but actually, pastors and secretaries, this is actually our lane. We actually dominate this space.
You have the market.
It just hasn't come out lately. We haven't had a hashtag Me Too, John Piper type stuff.
Oh God, no!
Don't say that. Don't say that.
That would wreck my soul. It would wreck. I would go into a state of not knowing what was life about if that happened.
Well, I'm just saying, you could go back to Jessica Hahn.
Sure.
I mean, just so many different little secretaries with the pastor. It just televangelists. It goes on and on. But to your point, even the guys, our heroes, it would be devastating.
I think it's also,
and even us ourselves.
I think it's also important for those of us who are complementarian and believing in roles for men and women, that we don't take that in an unhealthy way, where we kind of give men so much power in the relationship that if women find themselves in an abusive situation, that they don't feel comfortable in the church accusing maybe their husbands or their fathers or something like that. So we have to be very careful that we are empowering women, that women feel safe to come forward, that they are in these situations. So while we do believe that men are the head of their households and hold eldership in churches, but we definitely don't want to have that power be misused in any way or exalted to the point where women feel timid and ashamed if someone abuses that power. So
that's great, man. Well, I really appreciate you guys just kind of sharing your thoughts on that. I really believe we have another episode in the making just to kind of unpack this a lot more. So really, guys, just stay tuned for that. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be continuing our conversation on white evangelicalism. We're really going to tap into the mind of Shogun of Flatbush. We're going to get into the mind of James Roberson and just really ask him, man, like what his experiences are, just planting churches, just his role, just in church, period, just kind of his own experience. So much to glean from him. So guys, keep it locked. We'll be back in a second.
City Image is the best.
What's going on, guys? This is City Image, and this is Daniel, the creator.
And it's your boy, Young Flatbush.
And Bryant, the theological giant. We just want to thank you so much for all the support that you've shown us thus far. But we just wanted to ask you guys to remember, if you haven't already, to like us, share the content if it's blessed your soul, subscribe, review us on iTunes. We're also on Google Play.
And if you want to keep up with us on social media, you can check us out on Facebook, City Image. We're also The City Image on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can hit us up at cityimagepodcast@gmail.com.
And again, thank you for the support.
Peace.
And we're back. Thank you guys for hanging with us. We are
Skitty Papa.
2 + 2 is 4. -1 is 3. Man. Man, so just want to thank you again, James, for being here on this podcast with us. You could have been anywhere tonight, but we just thank you for being with us, blessing our audience today just with your experience. Why don't you just give us just a little background on you and just kind of how you've come up in ministry. Just take it away, man.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a church planter now, but my initial ministry experience happened through college ministry. And played college ball.
I'm on the right track.
There you go.
Played college ball. And once I got done with college ball, found myself on a college campus with my old friends, with my old fraternity friends. And I wanted a space where I felt like they would come to. And so in light of that, found myself helping to start a campus ministry. So that was kind of the first embers of a desire to start something. And from there, God placed on my heart, obviously, to go to seminary. So I started off at Dallas Theological Seminary, and then would eventually end up at Southeastern Seminary. And then through, of course, this vision of starting something connects you to denominations and whatnot. So I would eventually plant with the Southern Baptist Convention, because they are the largest denomination in the world. And church planting, for the most part, if you're going to do it in an attractional type way, you are going to need to probably have some kind of backing and connection to other resources.
Cool. Appreciate that, man. Well, the cool thing about podcasts is that people are able to hear us, but they cannot see us. And so just want to let people know, James is an African-American man who has planted a church through the Southern Baptist Convention. And so, man, for the people, can you just give them an overall experience of just, man, how have you encountered white evangelicalism just through your journey? My.
Well, when you first start out, and when I first started out, I didn't obviously think of anything like, I didn't even think of it so much as white evangelicalism, and I wouldn't even know what that term was. The first thing that I thought of was there was a girl in my class that was in a ministry called Young Life.
Okay.
And then she led me to a group called the Navigators, and they would disciple me. And then all the Navigators guys went to this thing called Prime Time, which was the weekly meeting for Campus Crusade. And so when I went there, I mean, I was one of 3 black people in the room, but I really enjoyed the Bible study. I felt like I was learning something, and my church experience, I had not really learned anything about the Bible in a way that I felt like matched the kind of detail I was getting in the classroom. Right. So a lot of the word I was getting in church was very inspirational, but it just didn't have any kind of depth, So that's why I saw it. I saw it as, here I am. I'm going to go and get connected with these guys. And then once you get a part of a culture, you start to unknowingly take on some of the values of that culture.
Yeah.
So whether it's a John Piper, and at that time, everybody was listening to John Piper tapes and Tim Keller, and Tim Keller had just planted Redeemer at the time.
Wow.
And so, you're like, oh, okay, these are the guys. And then you're hearing about Tony Evans, and then you hear about Dallas Seminary. So then, you walk into this space where they're teaching in a way you've never heard, and it just compels you. And over time, you unknowingly create a hierarchy where the black church, the experience you had growing up, becomes a not just a subform, but you almost become disgusted with it.
Yeah.
Because you said, man, I didn't get any of this. All these Greek words, these Hebrew words. Nobody told me about what an apostle meant. I didn't know what the definition of apostle was. I didn't know who wrote all the books of the Bible. And you have this disdain for the experience you had. But something happens over time. And with my experience with white evangelicalism, I think that I first started to, in a sense of, they use the terminology woke. The first time I really started to awaken to what I would consider a difference with me and evangelicalism in general was when I was at Dallas Seminary. And I remember that I began to just bring up cultural topics. At the time, Denzel Washington had won an award for when he's like, I think gangster.
Training Day?
Training Day. Yeah, he had won an award for Training Day.
Sure.
And I think Halle Berry had won an award, and she was like a prostitute in
that Monsters Ball?
Monsters Ball. Yeah. And I just referenced like to one of my friends. I was like, isn't it funny how Denzel Washington's done all these different he's done all these he's acted all these different parts, but it's when he's a thug he gets an award. And I said, you know, Halle Berry's done all these parts, but when she's like she's a prostitute, she gets an award. And this phrasing of bringing up the race card and all these different things got thrown at me. And I noticed that obviously politics was a taboo subject, but race was a taboo subject, one in which some of the black dudes I was around were uncomfortable with as well. And so this led me to leave Dallas Theological Seminary and go to Shaw University Divinity School, where my dad was the dean of the seminary itself. And I wanted to get a cultural experience of like, I want to be amongst blackness while I learn theology. And I would eventually go on to graduate from Southeastern Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. So what is, you know, it's a very big question of what was my experience. What I eventually would come to realize was there are some great people within evangelicalism. And when I use the phrasing white evangelicalism, I'm not talking about the pigmentation or I'm not talking about stringy hair per se. I am talking about a unique way in which white supremacy filters its way into a theological belief system by making people believe that the way they do things is the right way holistically. So, man, I look back at when I was I hopefully y'all edit some of this, please. Praise God.
No, it's drawn and cut.
We live right now.
When I was a kid, in 1988, I got a high top fade.
Okay.
This was a huge deal.
Yeah.
Because at the time, you either had a low haircut or you had a mini fro. And I got a high top fade. And I went, and at my church, at the barber shop, everywhere I went, everybody was like, yo, you got a high top fade. And I had a part in it as well. Because
Let's go.
Big Daddy Kane had a high top fade. He had two dancers, Scoop Lover and Scrap Lover. And so they had a part in their hair. And so I got a part in my high top fade. So everywhere I went, it was like, yo, it was this fade. It's amazing. I was like, oh, thank you so much. So I walked into school, and my school was majority white. I walked into this one class, and the teacher saw me, and I remember she was like, what'd you do to your hair? And I said, oh, I got it's a high top fade. And, she was a teacher. She was older. I could tell she wasn't really into it. But I remember she said, what is that in your head right there? And I said, that's a part. And she said, that's not a part. And I said, yes, it is. It's a part in my head. And she had her hair parted.
Oh, wow.
And she said, no, that's not a part. This is a part.
Wow.
They cut that line in your head. I brushed my hair, and that's how I got my part. And I remember getting into this debate and conversation with this woman about what a part is. And as I'm talking to her, I'm like, no, a part is when you have a line in your head, whether it was cut in there or brushed, it's a part, period.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I saw in that conversation was I had to elevate the conversation above what she was trying to suffocate me with culturally to understand what a part is, whether it's shaven in or brushed. And that's really been my experience with white evangelicalism, whether it's preaching or whether it's theology.
That's so good.
They will tell me, I'll never forget, when I would get approached about preaching, and it would just kind of be like, the best way to preach is expository, word for word, line for line, this, that, or the other, and I'm like, well, so what you're saying is that this is the way to preach. And I'm like, well, I think Charles Spurgeon was a pretty effective preacher, and he preached topically. I also think Jesus was an effective preacher, and he preached topically as well. And so now you're in these debates, and you're just like, but wait a minute. But above all that, what is preaching? And I think what you see is that when Jesus is on the road, on Emmaus Road, and there are two dudes with him, they end up walking away and they end up saying, did not our hearts burn? You know, and there's something happening on the inside of them that's deeper than just the methodology. And so when methodology becomes defined by, you know, methodology can be mixed with supremacy. And so you have to, like, just the same way that I had to be like, wait, I went home and I'm like, do I have a part or don't I have a part? That's the way I felt in seminary. Like, wait, is this who I am? So all the music that I grew up listening to, they essentially saw my church as junior church. The black church, I don't even think they take it as a legitimate church.
Wow.
And you know, I'm not even sure if black churches are counted in evangelicalism in the percentages that they look at. So part of my experience is a seminary looking out saying, we have pure doctrine for you. We have history for you. We have Greek for you. We have Hebrew for you. And it looks like it's this pure, you know, cup of cold water that you're going to drink and be like, this is great. And then you start bathing in it and you're like, oh, I'm clean now. I'm clean. Not realizing it's not pure water. It's actually bleach. And what they want is they want you to become like them.
Yo, that is
you know, and
good,
they want you to take away.
Yo, you hear the dimes this man is dropping right
Shogun
now?
Shogun with the blade out.
Shogun is with the blade out, fam.
But they want to take away everything that I've come to realize. So, and the saddest part, which I'm sure you all have discussed or at least put out there, is that the reason why my father went to New York Theological Seminary and got his PhD from Fordham, the reason why he only could go there is because conservative seminaries, one, made a decision to only stay in the South, but two, they made a decision not to accept black men. So there's this cyclical reality that you've not accepted a form of people, and then you demean this group because they don't meet your standard. But even bigger than that, in white evangelicalism, they still operate by some of the same supremacist thinking. The only thing they're doing is allowing more colored people in, but they're still operating with some of the same supremacist way of thoughts. So it ends up being like a golf club where we let you in, we allow a certain group of people in, but those people aren't changing the way we think. And so I think that evangelicalism could certainly use a dose of being more multicultural, not just multicolored. So
that's good. That's so good.
Man, James, thank you so much I feel like I just heard a sermon.
Yo, that was amazing.
Bryant, Danny, any thoughts on what James said?
I had a question that came up as you were talking, and I don't know, just run with it. If you have any thoughts to it, you can definitely share your thoughts to it. But as you were talking, and you brought up the methodology that white evangelical culture has versus the black church culture. And as someone, who, I'm heavily influenced by Reformed thought, kind of European, quote unquote white culture. Right. And there's a part of me that feels, even though granted, I'm charismatic and, I'm a amener during the sermons.
I've experienced
I have elements of quote unquote black church culture inside of me. I would be lying to say that I haven't been influenced heavily by European sort of thinking, to the point where I've had to check myself on black church hate. Right. Yeah. And so, but there's times where I felt kind of like a sellout, kind of like someone who isn't fully a son of the black church. And so what would you say to people who really do feel like they get some truth from our white brothers and sisters, but they're still wrestling with this identity? Like, should I, because sometimes I feel like I honestly wrestle with whether or not I should be reformed, right? Because there's a sense in which, like, culturally, this is not what my people know, but I open up the Bible and I see it there. Right. And so I don't know. Am I clear in what I'm saying, what I'm asking? So, I mean, do you have any thoughts to that?
This is what I love about what Rasul did with John Piper.
Sure.
Where he took an article from John Piper and dismantled it, appreciated parts of it, but dismantled it for what it was, which was an unwillingness to look within himself, an unwillingness to, and as long as our evangelical brothers continue to make racism not systemic, but only individualized, only hate words, things of that nature, but not anything to do with prisons, not anything to do with schools, things of that nature, then what ends up happening is Black people who get amongst white evangelicals, but never critique white evangelicals, never critique Reformed theology. What ends up happening is they get into these white contexts, and then they always talk about Creflo Dollar. They always talk about armor bearers. They always talk about what Black folks is doing. And it is a form of self-hatred because they are exalting white worship, white preaching, white theology, and they are diminishing Black preaching, Black theology, Black churches. And all I'm saying is and that's the thing that I love. I see what brothers doing now, use the same tools they gave us to understand context and apply it to America.
It's good.
Look at what evangelicalism did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. So I think that as long as we use the skills and the tools that God has given us through our white brothers, of which I appreciate, but we help them to see themselves, because as Tim Keller says, oftentimes white people don't understand they have a culture, just like a fish doesn't understand it's in water. So you have to help them to see there are certain norms that they've created that are not meant for everyone and everywhere.
That's good. That's good. Thanks for that.
That's really good, man. James, I kind of want you to unpack a little bit, going back to your analogy of, man, this cup of cold water that we think we're consuming that's actually bleach. Man, when we are bathing ourselves in that and we are kind of whitewashing ourselves, what are we losing in the drain? Oh, Lord Jesus, this is going to be on the tape. Take your time.
I just find it shocking as a church planter. If I was planting a church in South Korea, I would not just study the people. I would study the churches, because in studying the churches, I would understand not only what the people experience within the community, but I would understand also how they respond to God. For some reason, Black and brown men take white pastors, worship leaders, and churches, and they try to take everything and just repackage it amongst Black people, and they don't study churches of that culture. So for instance, Black people tend to be a very narrative people. When you look at most of our churches, you see that, and you see, of course, you can look at a Ralph West and see that there's preaching that is done with high intellect, but it's done in story form. It's call and response. It's connective. It's emotional. It's visceral. And you see this amongst people, that they are narrative, they're visceral, they're soulful. But now you saw John Piper, or now you see Tim Keller, and now you're going to try to intellectualize a bunch of Black people. And that's why we see all these evangelical Black churches tend to struggle, because they're really trying to repackage whiteness into Black forms. So one of the things is and don't get me wrong, just because you are Black does not mean that that's you. But you have to look at the type of people you're trying to reach, who they have been, and what they listen to now. And so now you got this. You got a guitar up there, and, we're just doing Hillsong all the time, and you're just like packaging whiteness for people, and you don't even want anything that's soulful. So I think that we rob the beauty of God's diversity when we don't allow people to flourish in the way that they are 90% of the time.
Yeah.
But now we want to repackage you into evangelicalism and take away your cultural nuances. So I think that there's a lack of appreciation for how we're made. And I think at the end of the day, we need to study the culture as if we're not a part of it and not try to change the culture. I think that's part of what it is. It's like, we need to know more Bible. So they just try to just shove Bible down the throats of Black grandmama. She been listening to church the same way. And that's what I did. I tried to teach my dad. I tried to teach my cousins. I tried to change them to get them to be more like people in my seminary. But I'm trying to win them. So good, so I think we need to do a better job of studying cultures that we're a part of, and learning cultures that we may have even grown up in.
That's great, man. I love that you mentioned your dad, man. Could you just talk a little bit about, man, what have you gained from him? You know, him just, you know, being a pillar in the Black church and kind of seeing you in your journey. I'm sure you guys have had some great conversations. How does, from his perspective, how does he view your journey and things like that? And what things have you learned from him as you look at the space that you're in versus the space that he's in?
I mean, my dad was frustrated. And there's a level of rejection that he felt, and probably to some degree still feels. You know, there is a linguistic fallacy, and it's when we say Southern Baptist Convention is about the South and the National Baptist Convention is about being national.
Talk about it.
The Southern Baptist Convention, that word is code word for slave owning missionaries.
My.
And National Baptist Convention is code word for we Black and have our own thing. So my dad is just like, why would you go to a place that, you know, I talked with you one time, Rich, about Uber and taxis, and how you told me how taxis rejected you as a Black man trying to go to Brooklyn. And now you exclusively use Uber because you know you have the freedom to use Uber when you want. And it would be weird if your daughter comes to you and starts selling you on the beauties of taxis and whatnot, and you just like, I remember when I couldn't
pick me up.
That's what I'm saying. And my dad is just like, how can you? And you're trying to tell me about SBC. Let me tell you. And so this was kind of the tension that we had. But at the same time, I was like, you know, Dad, I just don't fit. I don't hoop. I don't. You know what I'm saying? I can't really get with all you're doing. You know, and so. Going back to the Uber analogy, I mean, the app just changes things. And so they met me where I was at. And so I was able to connect to them. So I think that was kind of the distance my father and I had. But I think the connection that we've had is this kind of coming back, especially with the election of Trump. Kind of coming back and my father being able to just, you know, my father's like, we've been woke. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. All these people, we, you know, and him helping me to see not just, you know, when you only look through the lens of evangelicalism, you see liberation theology as completely a fail. But when you look through the lens of a man who was born during that time, you know, you tend to see why those theologies were built out. So I think my dad was able to give me a good picture of why a James Cone existed. And why many of those books came into existence.
Just to kind of follow up on what you're saying, though, I think, you know, I definitely appreciate what you said, but your dad does raise a good point, though, right? In the sense that, you know, certainly you connected with them, but does your connection warrant going back to people who once kind of, you know, enslaved you or, you know, kind of rejected you? And so, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I'm a part of the SBC, so I know where I stand on it. But to those people who would still really struggle with that, what allows you to come back and partner with individuals who have this history and may have, you know, sort of repented about it and, you know, written statements like, yeah, we're sorry about this, but still very clearly, I mean, even a few months ago, the SBC could not come out and without hesitation, denounce, what was it, white supremacy? What was
the alt-right?
The alt-right, right? Yeah. So how can we, you know, what gives you the patience, I guess, or how do you navigate that space? Like, how can you validate still being a part of something like this?
Well, this is the American experience. The American experience is for Black people to go to a school called Robert E. Lee. It is to have a state flag to be a Confederate flag.
Sure.
It is to have a school be called the Rebels. It is to have Redskins. It is to have Braves. And it's to have the Southern Baptist Convention. To be an American is to be in a space that ignorantly celebrates its past as if its past is sanitized of the savagery of the American Indian, of the savagery of slavery. This is what it means to be an American. And white evangelicals tend to be ahistorical. So in many ways, you come up in a world where history is not an important thing to you. So I realize and I recognize that many of my brothers and sisters who may love a Lecrae, or they grew up on hip hop and all this other stuff, that we have some shared experiences. I realize that there is a whole generation of people within the Southern Baptist Convention that don't have as these areas that I'm easily able to point out.
Right.
They don't have those markers within their mind. They are about missions and they want to see Black people come to the Lord. They want to see Latinos come to the Lord. But when it comes to justice, they have a major blind spot. And so I find it my calling. It's really a God thing. That I am in this space in order to be a voice.
Yes, good.
And a friend. Yeah.
It's good.
It's amazing, man. So James, I want to hit you with a quick lightning round.
Okay.
So we've gone through the archives of your Twitter feed. And we got a couple tweets. I'm going to read the tweet. And just give us like a quick, just unpacking of what
James, I'm just saying, prepare for the angry emails. Prepare for the...
As long as we don't lose supporters.
Yeah.
So the tweet is, to win the next generation, evangelicals should focus less on their perceived oppression and focus more on how they're perceived as oppressors.
Well, I mean, Russell Moore has a really good book on politics, or really on winning America. And what he says there is what I think we should all embrace. And he says that Christians should not, in essence, see themselves as the moral majority, but they should see themselves as a prophetic minority. And so when you're a minority, you don't presume to have all the rights. You have to fight for rights. But as the moral majority, you presume that prayer in school should be a certain way. You assume that, birth should be done a certain way, that marriage should be done a certain way, all within the guise of Christianity. So, not to say that those things shouldn't be fought for, but when you think America is yours, then you presume that you're the Native American being and gay people are the pilgrims coming to take your land.
Sure.
They're the colonizers. So it's helpful to see the history of this country in its fullness.
Awesome. Next tweet is, the great lie of the evangelical church is that the topic of race is a hard conversation. Hard for who?
Well,
unpack that. What do you mean by that, James?
At the end of the day, I feel sad for the churches that I go down to in the South, and they have never done a sermon on race. They've never done a sermon on race. They've never had a conversation about race. Many of their people have never done a blog on race. And when you ask them about, oh man, what's it like to be in the Southern Baptist Convention? Well, I've had these conversations about the Southern Baptist Convention and the background of it. And many of them don't know. They think that this word Southern means down South. So it's divisive in their minds because they've just not grown accustomed to the conversation. But it is a necessary one, and it'll awaken them to reality. And Black people have a unique advantage of understanding reality and the true history of this country.
That's great, man. Man, James, a lot of our listeners are people who are struggling with this topic of race. They are constantly hearing, man, should I just be focused on the gospel? And we know how dismissive of a statement that can be. Just for some practical applications for people who are in churches, they're frustrated. Their churches aren't talking about this topic, or when they bring it up, they're kind of getting shut down. For people who don't attend churches like the church we go to, man, what are some things that they can do to start to break down the walls of white supremacy, white evangelicalism in their community, in their church? What can they do?
Well, I think the first thing is that you have to make a decision. All right. Part of being in a church is accepting the flaws of that church and accepting the blind spots of that church. So if you are in a white evangelical space because you enjoy the preaching, you enjoy the worship, and you enjoy the community, and there's a part of you that's not able to thrive because of there's no cultural nuance, then you are going to have to lead up, and you are going to have to at first acknowledge this church is broken and the leadership is broken, and I need to be a part of helping and also acknowledging your brokenness as well.
Right.
But that being said, this is not the time. You don't need to bust down the door of the pastor to get him to submit to you. Because if that's the case, if you need the church to submit to you right then in this area, you just need a different church. But if you're going to be patient with them, then I think that when, you're in small group and they're going around, and then you be honest, say, hey, I'm struggling with, the Eric Garner situation, and it's really hard for me right now. And people get silent, and
awkward,
and it gets awkward, and you become that guy for a second, and then you bring it up again. But I guarantee, and I would even say, I pray that one day we could, talk about this more, because it's something that I'm really wrestling with and struggling with. And I just pray that God would open a door, not for evangelism as much as for fellowship, that God would give you fellowship within your fellowship.
So, James, just to kind of follow up with that, is there ever a situation where you would counsel someone to leave a church that is not being culturally kind of relevant to them? Or probably, well, let's just start there. I think maybe the deeper issue of participating in injustice is one thing, but sort of like just they're not being culturally sensitive to this issue, and it is really hurting the person. Would you ever counsel someone to leave a church that's like that?
Well, unfortunately, I think that, when we talk about 9 marks of a healthy church and things like that, oftentimes ethics are left out.
That's right? Good. So, very good point.
And I think, to me, evangelicalism, the theological problem is why is there a liberal church and a conservative church?
You about to break it down.
What is the whole essence? And when you look at liberal churches, for the most part, they have they have this hyper sense of justice, and they have this hyper sense of freedom and deliverance. And part of this personal piety and this heart theology that you get in the conservative world, where it's you and Jesus, and then over here in the liberal world is that think about it. We're all looking at the Bible and we're just emphasizing different parts. And I think that evangelicalism is broken. It is just simply broken, and it does not have a clear sense of justice. Meanwhile, Jesus is a poor man from Nazareth. Who hangs out with poor people. And the funny thing is, evangelicalism has decided to make Matthew 28 their mantra, whereas liberalism decides to make Matthew 25 their mantra, i.e., I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. So we both are circumventing one another to get to our different agendas. And interesting, though, Matthew 25 is a judgment text, but that's a whole other conversation. But my point is that so when you do not see a passion for the least of these, you should be concerned for that church. Because Jesus says on that day, And he actually says, you will be surprised.
Yeah, you'll say, Lord, Lord.
So Matthew 25. So you shouldn't just say, should I be here? You should grieve for that church.
That's good.
Because Jesus says this is something that it will be a part of his evaluative measure when it comes to heaven.
So good,
Man, James, thank you so much again just for being here. I wanted to just give everybody a chance just to give their final thought on this topic as we kind of close the chapter. For now, we'll definitely, there's a chance we could kind of come back to this in the future. But as we kind of close this chapter on white supremacy, white evangelicalism, just kind of final thoughts to leave with our listeners.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm encouraged by this
Awesome.
podcast.
We out here trying, man. We trying.
Basically Bridge Radio.
We just trying.
It's basically Bridge Radio. So
Bridge Radio, that's awesome.
it's appropriate that you're on.
It's good to be here. I appreciate you guys. Something we've been talking about in church, but just you guys shooting your shot, putting it together. It's a thing, and it's just moving the ball down the field. But we are in a unique season as a church. I'm not talking about Bridge Church. I'm saying as brothers and sisters in Christ. Race is a topic that has started, and it started with Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
That to me was a linchpin, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner. And then you have to talk about Trump, and this is a milestone that's happened.
Yeah.
And the church, as we have seen it, the white evangelical church is struggling with its identity in this season. Yeah. And those of us who have positioned ourselves amongst evangelicals, we cannot just be the bearer of rage. And we cannot use wokeness as a unique form of Gnosticism, saying that we have this higher knowledge, but we have to be able to use the knowledge we have as servants. We are not judges of white people. We are servants to our brothers and sisters. So
good.
So the experience that I have doesn't make me woke, whatever. It just makes me, I'm discouraged. I hurt. I'm frustrated, but I'm like Jesus, man. I'm a man of many sorrows. I'm trying to help my white brothers see what I see.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to go the distance. And in many ways, I have to be an abolitionist for their minds.
Yeah, man. I don't really have much to add to that, man. But I think I'm just right along that same vein. I was just very encouraged by what you said, even as you kind of talked about being in the SBC and seeing yourself as that voice. I find that I meet various kinds of black people or minorities as they talk about this issue. And I don't think that anyone is wrong per se, but there are some who this is very painful for them and they can't engage in these types of conversations because it's hurtful, right? And that's just where they are emotionally, and that's fine. No knock to them. You have to know what your psyche can deal with. But there are some, I feel like, who've been equipped to engage, right? And I find myself, I get frustrated and I get hurt and disappointed when I see certain things by evangelicals, but I always feel a deep passion to engage, and so I feel encouraged. I don't know where my life, how did I end up at Westminster? Why did I end up reforming? I don't know why God did that, right? But I know I'm going to be in two spaces, right? I'm never going to be that Presbyterian, shout out to Presbyterians, but I'm never going to be that guy in Reform. I'm never going to be that. But I'm probably never going to be what a lot of people see as authentic black church. You know what I mean? And I don't know why God made me the way he made me, but I know that as I have to kind of straddle these spaces, I'm going to do my best to engage. You know what I mean? Yeah. And especially in terms of evangelicalism, critique them confidently and lovingly, as you said. So I'm just so thankful, man, that you were here, man. You dropped so many major keys, bro. So, but I'm encouraged by that.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, I think, this is definitely a great conversation. It's definitely an appropriate way to end it, or at least put a cap on it. And I think, even I think about people like Pastor Ryan, the guy who commented on our last episode, and really just gave us a shout out on how impactful this was for him, as he is a white pastor in Brooklyn, and as he thinks about these issues and talks about it with his church. I think about people like that who are trying to position themselves almost as friends, right? Or as allies. Man, just keep doing what you're doing, keep seeking to understand, and just pray that, because ultimately when we talk about change and we talk about power, we can sit here crying as the kind of quiet minority, but really we will need our allies on the other side, our white allies, to come alongside us, and also cry in the same way, to empathize in the same ways, and to enter into the shoes of people who have been hurting. And so, I appreciate even Pastor Ryan for commenting. And
that's good stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's just deep. I just have to enter into a space of just like apologizing to a lot of old friends and current friends and people that I've spent a lot of time demonizing churches that I came from, churches I got saved in, and because they didn't, I use doctrine as like a complete line in the sand to completely just eradicate any kind of positive influence that they have ever had. And there's just a lot of guilt, even just in what we've talked about of myself. I drank that cup. I washed myself in the bleach. And I just remember conversations with people, and I cringe when I think back to what I said, of just completely denouncing their influence or them having any kind of positive impact solely based on doctrine. And I just have a greater appreciation for churches in my neighborhood that have been there for a while. They certainly have their issues, but they have many of the people that I'm trying to reach, and without them, I wouldn't have had a church to go to. And there were no white evangelical churches in my neighborhood growing up. So we talk about the black church, but the same thing goes for these indigenous churches, Caribbean and things like that have popped up, especially in the city, and have been toiling in the city for a long time. And so I really, this whole conversation has just given me a greater appreciation for my spiritual heritage, in the sense of just churches that really poured into me before I found out who John Piper even was. That's good. Before I even found out who Tim Keller was. And so, it just gives me a greater appreciation for them. And I'm just going to be spending just more time just understanding the full spectrum of, we talk about, heresy, and just like the idea that slavery is a heresy, and white supremacy should be held in the same regard for doctrinal, in the same way we hold doctrinal error and things like that. So just a more fair way of looking at each and every, leader, as I kind of inspect whether I'm down with them or not. And so this has been great for me. James, again, thank you so much for coming. Oh man, I need to listen to this episode again.
What?
So many dimes dropped. I really appreciate you taking your time, man. For real, we up late. I know whatever time y'all listen to this is we going past midnight on this joint.
Into Wednesday, but we had to do it though.
Oh Lord!
So man, thank you so much for coming.
You were like, "Hey, I know you could have been anywhere else." I was like, "Could have been that."
Warm pillows. But shout out to you, man. Just really appreciate everything. Guys, it's been a great, fantastic episode. Guys, stay tuned for more from us consistently. Really trying to give y'all at least 2 per month. We got another episode lined up. It's going to be just as amazing. We will have a all-women takeover of the City Image podcast. None of our voices will be on it, praise God. And we'll be talking, well, not us, but they will be talking about just celebrating women in the church. I think that's really important, especially coming on the heels of our first conversation just about rape culture and different things. Man, church has not been immune to these ideas of male supremacy and abuse and things like that. So really want to spend some time celebrating our women and just men, giving them this platform to really speak to our audience. So guys, keep it locked. We'll be giving that episode pretty soon, so stay tuned.
City Image is the best.